This program is brought to you by the Forbes-featured Freedom Hub Health Plan, the alternative to overpriced and restrictive insurance. The Freedom Hub Health Plan is exactly what you need. By Frequency Medicine Associates, supporting health professionals and laypersons with safe and effective advanced telemedicine-like technology that can scan and help rebalance the root causes of stress and illness. By the Planet Lockdown film, which can be seen on the Freedom Hub's Rumble channel along with many great speakers. And by The Pavilion, a 21st century community hub that brings together many of the disruptive innovations featured by the Freedom Hub, including direct pay healthcare, farm-to-table dining, TED-like Freedom Hub talks, and more. Visit your-mp.com/pavilion solution for details.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to this episode of your Freedom Hub's Working Group. I'm your host, Jeff Cantor, along with Charles Froman and our special guest today. Before we get started, just as a quick review, this is the website, your-mp.com. When you hover over home, you'll see the webinars. And if you scroll on down, you'll see the two different shows we do and the guests of the week, a little bit about the future guests, and then importantly, the links to see the past shows. But today we're going to have a great topic, one that is a perennial favorite, and hopefully we can take it off our list and get it done finally, is about our income tax. So with that in mind, I'm going to have Charles introduce our guest today.
Thank you, Jeff, and welcome Jade Walle, a certified public accountant, a kind of person who keeps the books at the businesses and helps us with their taxes. And he's going to talk about a huge issue, and because it's huge, it's frustrating because, you know, the unasked question is, why aren't the politicians who want our votes proposing stuff like this? The FAIRtax has been a bill in Congress for 2 decades, and it's never gotten a vote because, as I wrote in the promo for today's event, the IRS is too useful a tool to attack dissidents. And those deep in history know that the primary job of government is to enable the special interests. And to do that, you have to smother the entrepreneurs, the mavericks, and those who think for themselves. And insanely, a decade ago or so, we saw a lot of Tea Partiers audited and their organizations persecuted by the IRS because it's easy to do. It's a very good weapon for government. You know, as a CPA, Jade's going to go into the economics of it too, because he wrote a great article about Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. And anyone that gets into libertarianism and then Austrian economics knows that it's not just overspending of your tax dollars that leads to inflation. Inflation really is a monetary phenomenon. It's excessive money printing by our central bank, the Fed. But you can't really discuss the Fed without discussing the income tax, because, you know, those two, as well as direct election of senators, made up what I call the axis of evil from 1913. Wilson, who got us involved in an unnecessary war, foisted the income tax on us once and for all. And on his deathbed, he's famously quoted as lamenting his ruining of our country with the Fed, you know, the tool of the banksters. And, you know, why aren't folks proposing abolishing the income tax and the IRS and just going to a sales tax? And, you know, the income tax is very punitive against entrepreneurs. And I was involved deeply with the FAIRtax when helping Governor Johnson run for president in 2012 and 2016. I ran his nonprofit, Our America Initiative, and I got him to run. And I'm guilty also of getting Bill Weld to be his VP. People hate me for that. But you know, that was his big tax policy. And it really I first heard about it as a congressional staffer in the 90s when our leader, Dick Armey, was pushing the flat income tax on a postcard. Easy to sell, a good political tool. You know, that's how the income tax started, as a flat tax on higher income. which is why he can't really support it, because it'll easily morph into the complex tax code we have today. In that debate, he was facing Dan Pilla, who has presented twice here on Freedom Hub over the years. Pilla saying, just tax sales, don't tax income. And I'll share my screen real quick to show folks, if you're into history, you need to look at this book, For Good and Evil, The Impact of Taxes on the Course of Civilization, by Charles Adams, another tax lawyer. He goes through taxes as used by the powerful through every empire through history. And that'll give you context. This is not a new issue. We have to discuss this issue and make the politicians support it. So with that, Jade, I'll let you, show us, your FAIRtax screen and talk as much as you want. We'll go to Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. I'm a 49-year-old CPA. I'm a partner in a Big Four public accounting firm, and I've actually gone through my partner affairs and risk and governance groups, and I'm not allowed to be, my accounting firm, representative for the FAIRtax. I'm just Jade Walle CPA. So that's how I come to you here today, and I'm glad to be here. I thought it'd be good, Charles, to maybe just do a super brief history, and you got into some of it in 1913, but a very brief history of how we got here, and then I want to talk about the FAIRtax. When we think about our nation's beginning, late 1700s, early 1800s, we, believe it or not, we financed our entire government, and for really over 100 years without an income tax, and it's almost hard to fathom that we could exist so long and do so well. Think about excise taxes, basically sales taxes on carriages, sugar, tobacco, things like that. Tariffs, when things came in, that financed our government. Ironically, when you think about the Communist Manifesto written in 1848 by Karl Marx, a very aggressive, graduated punitive income tax is on his top 10 ideals of what a perfect communist society would look like. And ironically, Abraham Lincoln, one of our greatest presidents in most people's views, was the first president to enact an income tax, even though it was technically disallowed by our Constitution, which prohibited a direct tax unless it was apportioned based on population of the states. So to finance the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln brought in our first income tax, and it finally got repealed. I believe it was 1872. People had enough of it, but the concept stayed. They had a foot in the door. And then by the 1890s, it got brought back again, and there is a growing fervor, a growing wave. If you can hear my little yipper dogs in the background, there's a growing wave, and I'd say it comes back to one of the 7 deadly sins that everything is based upon, envy. Now, I think arguably pride is the deadliest of the 7 deadly sins, but envy's got to be up there. And envy was the foundation utilized to interject an income tax in the late 1800s, and then obviously it culminated in 1913 with the 16th Amendment. But the Republicans really played what I'd say was the worst political blunder of all time history. At least it's got to be in the top 5. What they said to the Democrats was, "Oh, sure, we'll go along with your income tax to soak the rich, but we have this 1895 Supreme Court ruling in Pollock versus Farmers Trust that says income tax, in fact, is illegal and not in line with the Constitution. So you'd have to do a constitutional amendment." Democrats took them at face value, and they unleashed envy-based campaign and got the whole country behind it. And when the income tax actually finally passed, it was 1909, and it takes a few years for the 3/4 of the states to ratify. It was like 77-0 in the Senate, and I think the House was something. It was like 99 to 1 as far as percentage-wise, as far as votes. It passed at unprecedented margins, unfortunately. And so then the last of the 3/4 of the states required to ratify a constitutional amendment brought us our wonderful income tax in 1913. And if you think about it, Charles, you mentioned the Fed. 1912 to 1913, we've got the tragedy of the Titanic, we've got the Fed, and we've got the income tax. What a horrible period in time for our country. And then obviously years later in World War II, payroll taxes come in after Social Security and funding the war, and the pay-as-you-go concept as opposed to writing one check at the end of the year. And we have this monstrosity that as of 2014 had over 77,000 pages of tax regulation, codes, laws, and court rulings that we're all as Americans responsible for knowing every single word of. So we fast forward to, well, Jade, what are you going to do about it? What are we all going to do about it? What are we going to demand our politicians do about it? Let's bring in the FAIRtax. And I'd like to start off by saying I'd be remiss. A lot of people I talk to about the FAIRtax, and this is the original book written by Neil Bortz in the 2000s. A lot of people I talk to are like, oh, I'd love the flat tax or the FAIRtax, and they use it almost interchangeably. Let me tell you what the flat tax is. And Charles, you alluded to it a little bit. The flat tax is an income and payroll tax that's administered and enforced by the IRS. Does that sound like any kind of reform? That's exactly what we have now, an income and payroll tax administered and enforced by the IRS. And even in 1986 with Reagan's tax cuts, the tax rates flattened out quite a bit, not completely flat. But what does that do? It's a lobbyist permanent employment act of fill in your year, because then it allows us to go all the way back through all the lobbying, and golf clubs are a health insurance or a healthcare expense, and all the stupidity that comes with the second most lobbied area in the whole K Street, Washington, D.C., outside of pharmaceuticals. It's the tax code. It's campaign contributions, and it's a vicious cycle. So what the FAIRtax does, it implements what we call a sales tax. And right off the bat, anyone who knows anything about sales taxes will say, wait a minute, Jade, that's regressive. It hurts the poor. If you say that a revenue neutral tax rate of 23% on everything we buy, new retail goods and services, is going to have a 23% inclusive FAIRtax rate in it, that's going to kill our working poor. Fair enough if everything were as it seems. The FAIRtax anticipated this and implemented what we call the prebate. It's technically in the act, it's called the family consumption allowance, but basically what it does, it is untaxes you up to the poverty level based on the Department of Health and Human Services poverty levels that get published every year. You take that poverty level, say it's 35 grand for a family of four, and you basically say, okay, you're going to spend at least the poverty level to live. Baby formula, diapers, food, rent, whatever your basic necessities are to you, you're going to spend that to live. And so what the FAIRtax does is say, you get your taxes back on that. Think standard deduction if we turn our heads sideways into the income tax world. You get that back, direct deposit into your bank account every month. So you're effectively untaxed up to the poverty level, which really means you are really only paying taxes when you want to pay taxes, when you decide, when you choose to purchase and consume new retail goods and services that are above what you need to survive. So it's really on you. And if we go psychologically for a minute, Charles and Jeff, Adam Smith wrote about this in Wealth of the Nations in the late 1700s. When we think about our property is what is most sacred to us. As human beings, if we're fortunate enough to acquire and accumulate any property, it's because we've earned some income and we've been able to, scrape together a few beans and put together a life. So what the income tax does, it psychologically pushes us towards what I call fraud. In the tax world, we'll use the term illegal evasion because of this. Because if you think about when does fraud occur, and this is from my financial statement auditing background, fraud occurs, so think illegal tax evasion from an income tax perspective, when three things are present. Opportunity, if the cash register drawer is locked, I don't have the opportunity to dig my hand in there. But if it's unlocked, I have the opportunity. Rationalization or justification, whichever of those two words you want to use. Usually with human beings, we can rationalize almost anything. We're a fallen people and a fallen species. We can rationalize and justify a lot of bad behavior. And then lastly, it's incentives or pressures. Do I have the pressure to legally evade or the incentive. And a lot of times the incentive is natural as well, because I want more money in my pocket. I think the government doesn't spend our funds appropriately. And so the incentives and the justification or rationalization, they're always going to be there. But the opportunity with our income tax, you're on your honor to fill out your tax returns. You've got all three elements that really, and then when you put on Adam Smith's teachings, oh, by the way, you're taking the very sweat off my brow that is the foundation for any property I have. You have an environment, and I'll go into this a little bit more on evasion. You have an environment ripe for evasion. Let's juxtapose this to the FAIRtax. Now I only get taxed when I want to get taxed if I choose to spend above the poverty level, because I'm getting all my taxes back on my basic necessities of life. And oh, by the way, I don't have the government telling me, well, French's mustard is food, so I'm going to not tax that at the register, but Grey Poupon mustard, oh, that's fancy. That's not food. And so you're going to have to pay tax on that, because you can just imagine the politicians, well, don't charge the FAIRtax on medicines or diapers or baby formulas or food. And then it's lobbyist 101 again. The FAIRtax makes it simple and efficient and transparent. You choose what your basic necessities are, but up to that basic necessity level, you're not paying tax. Psychologically, you have the predisposition for evasion is cut out by the knees. And oh, by the way, opportunity. Because again, you're going to always have incentives. You're going to always have rationalization and justification to commit fraud, to illegally evade. But the opportunity goes away with the FAIRtax. Think Amazon as you complete your order, Walmart at the register, Home Depot at the register, Bed Bath & Beyond, wherever you want to consider your retail purchases. Good luck saying that I'm not going to pay the FAIRtax. Now, right? Evasion is chopped off at the knees. The opportunity is gone. Now you're going to always have some evasion. The lawn guy, hey, I'll just pay me cash and I won't charge you the FAIRtax. But a study that I've done, and I'm going to share my screen here and go to the FAIRtax website. The FAIRtax website here, if you go to the research tab where I'm going here, and then you go into evasion, yours truly actually did an article, and and you can see it here, Jade, Walle, September 2020. When I put together state sales tax studies on evasion and extrapolated that based on data from the IRS, etc., illegal evasion will go from $1 trillion a year, which our IRS commissioner admits now, $1 trillion a year. That's enough to balance the budget before COVID spending. It'll go down by 95% to 50 billion. Now, still, it's horrible, but we've got humanity, so there's always going to be some cheating on the fringes. But think about that, 95% reduction in income tax evasion or tax evasion when we go to the FAIRtax system. This is what we call a good problem. Now, obviously, FAIRtax doesn't address spending, right? So that's a different debate, and I have opinions on that, but we're just talking about the mechanism to collect the taxes that our Treasury needs, and it's a revenue neutral concept. So if we're bringing 3-4 trillion a year now, FAIRtax brings in the same amount, and that's the way the rate was set up. But what the FAIRtax does now is not only does it just completely obliterate evasion because the opportunities chopped off at the knees and our psychological disposition is not to cheat anymore, but what the FAIRtax does is it allows us to many things really, but it allows us to go about our business with no IRS, with no income tax returns. My wife's an interior decorator, and I'm a CPA. I'm not a tax guy, but I'm a CPA, know enough to be dangerous. I would be up till 2 or 3 in the morning reading IRS tax forms just to make sure my wife gets it right. All that's gone. The FAIRtax eliminates income tax, individual, business, corporate, AMT, gift, the death tax. All of that goes away. And guess what? You don't even have to track how much tax you spend. You can if you want to. Look at your cash register receipt and you can see how much FAIRtax you pay. That's in the act. It's got to be on the receipt. I like that. But the cool thing about the FAIRtax is you don't have to. You can just pay as you go. And here's another cool thing. This took me a while to wrap my head around. Let me make sure I'm okay on time here. When we think about the cost of everything we buy at the register, there's this concept called embedded taxes. And again, you have to noodle on this for more than a minute. We think about every business who pays a payroll matching tax. 7% of every employee that as they pay their FICA, Medicare, and Social Security, the employer matches that payroll matching tax. Think about all the income taxes that the businesses, individuals, sole proprietors, corporations pay. All these costs are just another cost. Think electricity bill, think rent, think payroll. All of these income taxes and payroll matching are another cost that get embedded into the bundle of costs that we ultimately base the foundation of our retail prices on, because we have to make some kind of margin under the guise of a free market, or at least semi-efficient market, and hopefully make a little profit at the end of the day. But taxes are just another cost. That's why the whole lie about, oh, corporations need to pay their fair share. Corporations, when they pay taxes, it just goes into the cost basis, and it comes out ultimately in the form of either higher prices, lower R&D, lower employment, lower wages, etc. It just gets passed on to you and me. So when we think about the FAIRtax implementation, all of these income and payroll taxes, probably within a matter of months, are just gone from the system. And so when the FAIRtax started up in the late 90s, mid 90s, late 90s, we had a lot of grassroots donation research that went in and hired the best economists in the world. We're talking head of the Harvard economics department type people. And guess what they found? Anywhere from 10 to 25% of the cost of everything we buy, US produced goods, 10 to 25% is embedded payroll and income taxes built into that cost. That falls out as long as we have a free market and competition, efficient or semi-efficient markets. All of those costs fall out. And so the cost of everything in the US is going to come down, depending on the industry and how much tax buildup, how long the supply chain is, 10 to 25%. That's huge. And then the invisible cost of our tax system that we pay at Home Depot and Walmart and Amazon, but we don't see it. But now all of a sudden becomes visible as we pay the FAIRtax. We get our prebate, we keep our whole paycheck, and life is quite a bit simpler. I think, Charles, to transition a little bit, and we'll open up to Q&A here in a second. Some of the Inflation Reduction Act and 87,000 new IRS agents that I'm sure you're all aware of over the next 10 years. The only good thing I can see from this is, if we go back to Abraham Lincoln's quote, is he said, the best way to get a bad law repealed is to enforce it strictly. So the only good thing, and it might come on the backs of painful experiences with more IRS auditors, et cetera, is that let's enforce a bad law more strictly, and maybe all of us will clamor more for the FAIRtax and actually demand it and go talk to our Congress men and women. Lastly, Charles, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the economy with the FAIRtax. The FAIRtax is rocket fuel for our U.S. economy. And again, we'll have some problems come out of this, but they're all good problems and stuff we'd be very glad to deal with. So think about when we have companies in the U.S. that sell abroad. We have this built-in embedded income and payroll tax. Say on average, 15 to 20% of everything. And when we go sell that abroad, we can't take that cost out of what we sell. And then other countries probably add their VAT and other taxes on top. So now let's compare that to that European country that wants to sell abroad, and their 20 to 25% of VAT built into their price. Guess what happens? Because it's a sales tax, they get it refunded to them, and they can go sell their widget abroad at the true cost base without the embedded cost of their VAT system in there. And then you think about that American widget, we've got our taxes embedded in there. Our American products are at an inherent, right off the bat, disadvantage because we've got all these taxes embedded in the cost versus our competitors who take it out. That's not fair. With the FAIRtax, those income and payroll embedded taxes come out, and now we're on a level playing field. And I always say, when it comes to American-made goods and services going abroad, if we can compete on a level playing field, I'll take our American products, our American men and women, our American companies any day over any country for most products, let's say. And the FAIRtax does this. And then all of a sudden, you're the tax haven of the world. And this is why we have to be the first country to do the FAIRtax. If we're not the first, other people will have that first mover advantage and they'll get there first. If we're first, all the factories, all the companies relocate here, and really we'll have an employee shortage. It will encourage legal immigration like never before because everyone will want to be here. There's no income tax on anything you produce here. There's no embedded taxes in the cost of everything you build up. Some of the best estimates are that you'd have, it would almost be too much, more than we could take. Again, good problem to have because everyone in the country, think multinationals, Fortune 500s that are, based abroad, everyone would want to be here. And again, you think illegal immigration, the FAIRtax is so elegant. It's so elegant. It's solving so many problems, or at least going a long way to solving problems. If you're in the US illegally, you don't get the prebate. You have to pay that full rate at the register, and you're not getting your prebate every month. That's a discouragement to illegally being here. If you are bringing in all these companies and we don't have enough workers, legal immigration will be encouraged by never before for skilled workers. And then they'll also be able to get the prebate if they're here legally. So I could go on for literally 2 hours, Charles and Jeff. I want to be respectful to the audience and make sure we have time for Q&A. I'm in about 20 minutes, but I'll shut my trap for a second here and happy to engage in some Q&A.
Very
Thanks,
good. I was going to
Jade.
say, Charles, I'm going to let you comment real quick. Everybody else saw some great comments in the chat while you were talking. Raise your hand. We're going to get to those questions. Charles, go.
Jade, back, if you can share your FAIRtax website screen. Do you know where on the site to learn about HR 25? Is it still that bill number to try and get co-sponsors?
It is. HR 25, every 2-year cycle in the House, it for some reason, administratively, it gets the same number. So we've been HR 25 ever since 1999 when it was first introduced. The Senate, when they get a companion bill, they get a different number every time. So yes, when we go to the FAIRtax website here, I think I'm sharing now, we can go to About, you can see our leadership. There's a way, the 1040 Club here on Donate, it's $10.40 a month, 1040, haha, it's the IRS tax form for individual taxes. But no one at FAIRtax, no one at AFFT, that's Americans for Fair Taxation, it's the grassroots organization that came up with the FAIRtax. No one receives a salary. Even Steve Hayes, our president, who's been on Freedom Hub before, he'll travel to Washington, he'll talk to politicians all on his own dime. What we try to raise money for is to hopefully at some point have enough to advertise a little. We don't yet, but we do, we do state fairs and you get the slip and fall insurance and just some basic rudimentary costs like that. But if it sounds reasonable to you, I know $10.40 a month, you won't even notice it, but it means a lot to AFFT and would really appreciate that. The FAQs are great. Here's how you get involved in this Get Involved tab. There's many states have state organizations, but how it works is the good tab. If we click here for a second, and there's actually a couple of good white, I'll call them little, they're on YouTube, the little whiteboard, they just last a couple minutes. Charles, Jeff, would you be okay? I think they're about 1.5 minutes. Do you want me to play one? They're really nice and an easy way to explain the FAIRtax to people. Did
you elect sound when you started the share screen button on Zoom?
Oh.
If you stop screen share and then press screen share again, you'll get a box to check allow sound.
Okay.
So click screen share again, and then you'll see the box to share sound on your options to share.
Okay, let me click share.
While you do that,
yeah,
Randy, do you want to
unmute
yourself and tell them where to find the bill on the website?
Nope, I got it right here. So here we go.
The FAIRtax is a tax replacement plan where we take all the federal income taxes, including corporate, personal, gift, and estate taxes, and replace them with one national consumption tax on new purchases above the poverty level only. This form of consumption tax comes with no exceptions and is progressive, not regressive. The poor are not paying more. and the rich are not paying less. What makes it progressive is that all Americans are untaxed up to the poverty level via the prebate, much like your standard tax deduction. The taxes are collected by retail businesses at state level, so the system is more accountable. The IRS is done away with, and you have control over your money and what the overall tax rate your household pays. The fair tax is revenue neutral, so the government receives the same amount of money as they do now. And it's fair because you decide what's fair, not them. To learn more, visit FAIRtax.org and be sure to like us on social media to help educate your friends and spread the word.
Thanks for letting me share that.
That was good.
Randy, did you want to unmute yourself to tell Jade where to go for the bill?
On the home page, about 2/3 of the way down, there's a link that will take you out to HR 25, FAIRtax Act of 2021. That's the current bill.
There we go.
There it is.
And Randy or Jade, to what do you attribute the lethargy in this bill's movement over the past couple of decades? Any ideas? Probably obvious.
I have 2 words: government education.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, Charles, I think it Steve Hayes always says this. I think the same thing with our politicians applies to us as individuals and people. We need heat. We need, unfortunately, as human beings, we need something tragic, like a Great Depression or something horrible in our lives. I hate that we're like this as people, but unless we feel heat underneath us, the politicians need to feel heat, not intellectual understanding, but heat to actually do something, and pressure and fear for not getting elected. We as individuals, I think, are lethargic because we go about our lives, and unless something is wrong and off, we go about our business and stay uninformed when it comes to a lot of these things. Everyone I talk to about this, why aren't we doing this? Well, it's because we all don't do enough to demand it and to cause there to be a heat with our politicians that they feel that they've got to do this, otherwise they're out of there.
Good point. It's funny when you say that. I've been in the health insurance field for 30 some years and getting a consumer to make a decision to buy the policies forever. But when the government imposed open enrollment, son of a gun, everybody was able to come to a conclusion because the clock was ticking. So there you go. We got some questions coming. Jonathan, I see your hand up first.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I just have some questions around the structural impact of our financial markets. Given how our financial and capital markets are currently structured, what perceived implications would you see on this being passed?
Yeah, it's a good question. I talked to one of my deals partners at my public accounting firm, and I put it up on the whiteboard. We were there at the office here in Denver late one night, and I was kind of explaining it to him. And from a capital market perspective, he said, "Wait a minute. So people are incentivized to save?" I'm like, "Yep, they're incentivized to save. So you're not going to tax investment income, so interest income, any kind of appreciation, capital gains? No taxes anymore. So I'm going to have an environment that's going to encourage investment, new company creation, R&D, increases in productivity when we think about our macro capital markets environment. I'm gonna have more people with incremental money. The study showed that purchasing power is increased with the fair tax, the money left in your pocket after paying all your taxes end of day. With a prebate and the embedded taxes reduced, everyone has more money. You're not taxed on investment earnings, income, interest. I'm going to have more investment dollars to do more in the capital markets. And so we talked about maybe the intricacies of income tax consulting that my firm does, that will fade away. But the increase in deals, the increase in acquisitions, dispositions, combinations, carve-outs will be massive as we become the tax haven of the world. And so when you look at the economic studies, and they're on the research tab at fairtax.org, several great ones, you look at GDP over 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, higher with the fair tax. You look at real purchasing power, you look at real wages, and virtually every economic indicator, let's call them the top 5, 10 indicators, they're higher with the fair tax. Even consumption, it dips for a second and then it even goes higher because we all have more money. Charitable contributions go up. Wait a minute, I'm not going to get a deduction for my charitable contribution. Guess what? You have more money in your pocket, and people give when they have more money in their pocket. Even when the rate went way up on what your deduction was worth, or when it got slashed, late 80s, charitable contributions went up. So basically, all of our capital markets will be stronger, and especially on the export front. I don't know if I answered your question specifically enough.
I was more talking about the macro and sovereign bonds, considering Federal Reserve notes are essentially credit derivatives of U.S. Treasuries.
So are you getting into tax deductibility like on municipal bonds, or?
No, I'm more getting onto the implications of the Federal Reserve's continued existence if this was put into place.
Oh, I see. Well, I believe, now again, this isn't the purpose of the fair tax, or I think this would put some pressure on the Federal Reserve from many aspects. If we think about it, the rates that banks need to charge on interest, it actually goes down. Banks have to cover income taxes. It's a cost buildup in the interest rates they cause. But on the surface, no. I mean, the mechanisms and the constructs will still be there for the Federal Reserve System. I think this might go a long way towards making us rethink that.
Okay, thank you.
Charles?
If Murray Sabrin can unmute, I'd like to have his comment on that question. Jonathan, I'd like to more clarification myself, because the fair tax is just a sales revenue fix to taxation, and so the Fed is still going to get money budgeted to pay the holders of the bonds. So I think both the Fed and spending are different animals, and that was going to be my question. Was folks are married to their mousetraps, and I think Gary Johnson got criticism from libertarians for the fair tax because folks just want to get rid of the income tax and the 16th Amendment without setting up an alternative. So they want their cake and eat it too. So we started calling it the least unfair tax, which is fair. It's still accurate. It's the least unfair tax. Going past the fair tax, if we did get, a balanced budget or a 10th Amendment enforcement bill to devolve a lot of the unconstitutional bureaucracies to the states, those good spending controls that would lead to us needing less revenue. I guess number one, you could lower the rate from wherever it is now, 23%, 20% down to 15 or the magical 10%, which is the biblical tithing number. Or we could, it's going to be lobbying and gamesmanship, obviously, with exemptions from the sales tax. That's just human nature. Have you envisioned how a generation from now, how the fair tax could be shrunk? Our friend Charles Ford has been chatting madly in the chat box about a tariff. That would be sort of a long-term goal, just have a sales tax on imports, nothing produced domestically. Because if you did get to a constitutionally sized government that was tiny, you would need less revenue. That I'm droning on here, Jade, but this is the kind of stuff we think about Freedom Hub, pie in the sky, long-term ideas.
Well, Charles, let me give you a little insight. So obviously, the fair tax by itself is just a mechanism to collect our treasury's revenues at a revenue neutral rate, whatever we bring in now. However, let's think about, again, how elegant the FAIRtax is with spending. So right now, when we think about spending at a federal government level, we spend in two ways. One is just outright expenditures, but others is in the form of less tax collections. What do you mean, Jade? Well, the home mortgage interest deduction, the charitable contribution, the deduction for hydrogen powered vehicles, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? That is, in theory, a spend, because I should have taken in $9 in taxes, but now I'm going to take in $7 in taxes because of those deductions, exemptions, credits, loopholes for encouraging whatever behavior me as the federal government want to encourage. What the FAIRtax does is it gets rid of all of that because there's no more deductions, there's no more income tax, and you only pay the FAIRtax at the register. So now, all of a sudden, if the FAIRtax is the law of the land, all of that hidden spending that comes in the form of less tax receipts than I should get based on the base law, all of that spending comes up into the transparent sunlight, and sunlight is the best disinfectant, right? So now, if you really want to spend and give homeowners more money or give hydrogen power guys more money, you gotta get the spending bill passed in Congress, and everyone gets to see it and everyone gets to debate it, as opposed to, oh, it's just a tax incentive and it gets buried and it gets shrouded in cloaked and really forgotten about. So the FAIRtax elegantly brings all the spending into the sunlight. So I think that very fact alone will then help us transition. Okay, I'm going to step out of my FAIRtax hat now and into future spending, which obviously we spend way too much. That transparency will help us, I think, as a nation, go towards a very in-depth, detailed analysis of what the heck are we spending all this on. And again, unfortunately, as humans, I think we need something like a Great Depression before we really hold ourselves and our politicians spending feet to the fire, because both sides of the aisle do it ridiculously. I know one a little bit more than others, but it's just a monstrosity. But the FAIRtax at least brings it into the sunlight, which I think helps us, Charles, towards your end goal there of where we want to go to let's going back to the original Constitution and in what was it, the 10th Amendment, and not having the federal government be involved in anything unless the Constitution specifically allows for it, which we don't follow that right now.
Indeed. And one more thing, Jeff, you may want to add to this. Health reformers don't appreciate the tax issue enough, because think about this, Jade. If there's no income tax deduction for employer provided benefits, would employers offer benefits? And if not, then we get back to individualization of healthcare, which would be a good thing, because then you have more consumers, more eyes on the bills, more people shopping around, more price disclosure. And someone made the comment yesterday or a week before on our health webinar we have every Wednesday, that as the manufacturing base collapsed and would return a bit, I think, with the FAIRtax, a lot of the employees got jobs as administrators in healthcare. So I think a lot of top heaviness in the health market would disappear with the FAIRtax.
It's a good point. It'd be interesting to see if the free market economy and 80 years of employers providing healthcare would kind of demand that without the tax incentives. But that's an interesting point.
One thing to add to that, and then I definitely want to have Murray pop in, is that what he was saying in SARS, that goes, because how many people from the consumer side are locked into a job because they're there just for the health benefits? So what lost entrepreneurship and everything else that potentially would come out of this as well? So, Murray, we didn't mean to cut you off a little while ago. Please jump in if you would.
No problem. Thanks, guys. This is always an intriguing issue, the tax issue, and my book from 1995 on how to create a tax-free America discusses I believe, if I recall correctly, I discuss all forms of taxation and why they are problematic, to say the least. And so let's just focus on the consumption tax, or the FAIRtax, which I think in and of itself is an oxymoron from a libertarian perspective. But anyway, the number 23% is an arbitrary, just as the progressive income tax rates are arbitrary. So there's nothing magical about that rate. And the other point, there are several other points. I don't want to monopolize the time since there's not much time left. If you're going to have a revenue neutral tax, then how does that improve the economy, since that you're still taking out the same amount of money that you're taking out now with the progressive income tax? So from a macro perspective, the whole society is not better off. Low-income folks may be better off because there's a high threshold for paying the tax, and there's a way to avoid this tax. I don't know if that's been thought about, because the proposal is that the tax is only applied to new goods. Well, think about a car dealer that takes the car out of the lot for a day and says it's a used car now. Does that car get taxed if it has 100 miles on it or something like that? So it's easily avoidable, I think, if you are creative as an entrepreneur, to saying, hey, I don't want my folks paying 23% of my goods because I'll have a competitive advantage. I'll say it's a used goods because it's spoiled, or it's overstocked, or whatever the case may be. In addition, the tax issue, and this is the point I make in my writings, the tax issue is really a spending issue. Because if we're not spending according to the Constitution, then we're going to have to raise money somehow, and we've been using the income tax and other taxes. In addition, if you have a 23% national sales tax, we know some states have a 7-8% sales tax. So if you piggyback on that, then we're talking about a really high tax rate for people who are buying new goods. And I'm not impressed with the whole notion of trying to reform the current system. As inflammatory as it may sound, I want to blow up the current system and replace it with something better, which is what my libertarian instincts say, which is no tax, and to have a totally voluntary society. So I've been arguing for that for many decades, and I appreciate the attempt to try to, quote, reform the current system, but I don't think it's going to work because the powers that be really want to keep the status quo. I think the consumption tax is a way of maintaining the status quo under the aura of reform.
Okay, couple comments. Thanks. The fair tax principle is that new good or service gets taxed once and only once. So the car dealer who says, "Oh, I took it out on a test drive," or did something, I can't call it used now and not collect the fair tax. It's gotta have it collected once. And again, evasion comes down 95%. I would challenge you, Murray, and say, if you think your system of having virtually no tax is a reform that's more likely to be political reality and pass than the fair tax, I think you're on a different planet. I think the fair tax is revenue neutral, and then you let the spending and all the other aspects that you're kind of inching over and putting your toe in the jacuzzi of. I think that's step two. But right now, this simplifies everyone's life. Everyone's purchasing power increases because you take all the inefficiencies of the income and payroll tax out of the system, and the spending is clear. So, and also like the elegant, like gently used goods. This bill, the Fair Tax Act, HR 25, will actually encourage recycling for all those green and ESG-minded folks out there. This will be the biggest recycling bill in the history of the U.S. because it's going to encourage more gently used resellers, because you can legally avoid the fair tax when you buy used homes. 88% of home purchases are used homes. You can legally avoid some of your biggest lifetime expenditures, legally avoid the fair tax, which I think again puts the power in your hands. To your rate question, again, embedded taxes fall out. So 10 to 25% cost reduction of everything that we buy. You get the prebate, and you're keeping your entire paycheck. So again, this is one of the biggest things Randy and I on the AFFT board struggle with, because people like, oh, I'm 23% and the state rate, that's 30%. Oh my gosh. And to be honest, we struggle with that, just the optics of that. But when you really think about everything, prebate, keep your whole paycheck, embedded taxes falling out of everything, you're actually ending up with more money in your pocket. It's just those numbers can be quite daunting. So I take your points.
Jeff, who's next? We go to Charles Ford.
Thank you. I've got a very brief question. Under this proposed tax system, if I form an S corporation and I buy everything from a corporation to the S corporation, where does the tax liability fall?
Okay, good. Business to business purchases. So if you're not the end retailer, the Home Depot or the Walmart or the lawn guy, you're not collecting the sales tax from your customer. So I think about my accounting firm. If I perform a financial statement audit for a Fortune 500 company and I charge them $2 million, I'm not going to charge the fair tax on that because the end use of that company's, let's say that Fortune 500 sells widgets, they'll collect it when they sell the widgets. No more business to business taxes, which by the way, like 90% of businesses aren't like retail businesses. They sell to other businesses, along the supply chain. So in your S Corp, if you're not a retailer, you're not gonna be charged the fair tax on your purchases from another company. And if you sell to another business, you're not gonna have to collect the sales tax either, if that makes sense.
Well, it makes sense, but here's my question. Within that question, I'm just a consumer. I don't want to pay the fair tax. So I just form a corporation and run everything through my corporation that I formed. How are you gonna stop that?
Okay, so you're saying you're cheating. And
No, no. I am doing what a citizen should do, which is legally unlawfully trying to avoid paying taxes. That is not evasion. That is avoidance. So explain to me how under your system that's going to work.
Well, that would be evasion under the fair tax. It would be cheating because if your purpose is to buy that for your personal consumption, even though you're doing it under the guise of a business to avoid the fair tax, you're violating the spirit of the law there. I tell you, when you have that S Corp and in any kind of corporation in a state, you have to register with the state for sales tax licenses and all that stuff, right? And states have these algorithms where they actually look, and this is the brilliance of the fair tax. We already got the state sales tax mechanisms to do the enforcement. We take the 12, 13 billion a year of IRS budget, it's gone. It's wonderful. Put it back into the treasury or go less in deficit. But these algorithms that the state sales tax folks have, they're like, okay, this size of business, they report this many sales. They know if you're in the ballpark of sales tax remittances. And if you're not, you get investigated and audited, and they're actually pretty tenacious about it. So I think that helps there, Charles. But there's always things you can do to try to escape taxation. But the bottom line is income tax evasion, $1 trillion a year, income and payroll tax, fair tax, 50 billion a year. So, and then I'd say, okay, let's say part of this S Corp scheme of yours is evading some tax, and it's part of that 50 billion. Does that mean that we should not get rid of the monstrosity that is the IRS? Should we let, because the fair tax is not perfect, no human institution is perfect, should we let the lack of perfection be the enemy of what's great and good? Certainly it's better than what we have now. So I think if you have one little observation about how something could be evaded, again, evasion goes down 95%, but let's acknowledge it and concede that for a moment. Does that mean you want to keep the IRS?
Okay, let me one last question. First
Well,
of all,
no, answer my question.
Okay, I'm going to, but I have to make a statement first, and that is briefly that if I set up an S corporation, I have a legal right to do that. You've created this system. I'm using it to my advantage. That's not evasion. So I'm not going to grant you that it's evasion or illegal. So we're going to stop right there and agree to disagree. Secondly, what happens between corporation, Walmart, and Home Depot? They're just swapping assets out. They're not turning around and paying any of the tax until they sell it to somebody. So they can grow their assets indefinitely and pay no tax. And you don't think that's going to create a system of fascism? Are you serious?
So Walmart and Home Depot, they're going to trade widgets back and forth, and somehow that's going to benefit them?
Yes, acquisition of assets without paying tax at the corporate level versus if I do that at my level, I pay tax. Yes, I see that as a definite advantage to a piece of paper and enslavement for a human being.
Okay, Charles, I just agree to disagree with your rationale there. If you want to keep the income tax, then stay status quo.
I don't want to keep the income tax. I want to overturn it. I'm sick and tired of endless war. I'm sick and tired of profiteering. I'm sick and tired of the cartels. I'm sick and tired of this country and the way it's structured. It's not my flag, not my land, and not my people. I just want to be very clear with you as to how I stand. Thank you.
Sorry, could I interject here, Charles? The S corp
I'm sorry.
designation.
Go ahead.
So the
real
S
quick.
corp designation was invented or created in 1958. Just as a piece of information for you.
Okay, Randy, we're running out of time. Go ahead. Randy, unmute yourself.
Yeah, no, the only thing I wanted to say was that if you read the bill, and I urge everybody to do it, don't stop before you get to pages 127 and 131. 127 is the elimination of the IRS. And 131 is a sunset clause that says, if we have not repealed the 16th Amendment by the last day of the 7th year, the fair tax evaporates and we're right back where we started from. So I know there's a lot of concern about having both. We have both now. There's a federal sales tax on fuel. So you're already paying a national sales tax and you're paying 5 different levels of income taxes. That's what we've got now. At least with the fair tax, the income taxes are repealed. That's the only thing I wanted to add.
Linda, real quick.
Yes, just to let you know that I am zero in financial issues, but an expert in health issues. The problem is I have a very small income from Social Security Administration and a pension from Europe. And I have to fight the pension here also in the United States. The problem is I have double taxation because they tax my gross income and not the net income after the taxes that I pay overseas. Another issue is I wanted to find about the economic impact payment that I received last year for the tax return. And it was difficult to find, and I asked a CPA where to go to find, and he told me go to IRS. And I went to the site. I put an ID name and email and password, but for me it was totally impossible to navigate and find what I wanted. And to tell you, I am very good in computers. I mean, they are made only for CPAs or other type of person, but not for a person who knows about computers. Impossible to find it. I don't know now what to do. So I sent to the CPA my password and everything for him to go, like if I were myself, and to find out what this income was, if I had the paper. I mean, we go towards a situation where we are going to have computer experts with difficult sites and possible sites, and all the other stupid, in quotes, population, impossible to go there. That's a difficult thing that goes like this every single day. More it goes, worse it is. That was my complaint. That was where we're going.
Okay, Linda, we're out of time here. Any comment, Jade?
Yeah, empathize with the pain of dealing with the IRS website, etc. The good thing with the FAIRtax, you don't have to do that. You just pay your tax at the register and you're done.
D, real quick, 1 second, quick.
Yeah, I just want to mention, you actually can't get completely rid of the IRS because it's an internal revenue service. It deals primarily with the internal affairs of the United States government. And so they still need to do their job. So I would just wind it back a little bit. I know you want to scale back the IRS, but it still serves a function within the government of sort of administering their accounts payables.
Yeah, the actual organization department, if you will be gone, as Randy pointed out. And you might have to, as far as internal intergovernmental affairs, etc., AP and bookkeeping, that would just be subsumed within a different organization, but the IRS would be gone. But fair point. There's certain aspects that you've got to bookkeep your governmental records, right?
Yeah, to me, it's about not having to report, keep records, or deal with the dissident persecution element of the income tax and the IRS. It's a weapon of the powerful, and paying a tax when I buy something is non-invasive and easy. And if we control spending, we can lower the rate. But, you know, so the fair tax doesn't absolve us of responsibility to muzzle our government in other areas. Oh, Jay, why don't you give a closing remark and how folks can reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to talk anytime. Give out my email. Yeah, I would just say, if this resonates with you at all, would appreciate any support for FAIRtax at fairtax.org. And check out the website. And I would scan through the actual act. It's a quick read actually, and it's just common sense. It's simple, it's efficient, it's visible, and it's fair. And my email is jadelondon1, like the number 1, at hotmail.com. Happy to have a dialogue or answer any questions for anyone. And Charles and Jeff, just really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the FAIRtax with your group.